Welcome to this week's Into the Wilderness podcast, and hopefully it's going to be out on time because we have been pressed to get everything organised in time. But I think it will be. We've managed.
I hope so. It's currently 2:25 in the morning.
As we're currently as we are currently recording this right now. But
so we're getting the work done so you can get your podcast on time.
Definitely.
And because we're going fishing tomorrow, so we need to get it done before we go.
So we have to apologise. The winner of the competition last week doesn't exist because we messed up on the posts.
Well, I kind of messed up. It was my fault. I'll take responsibility. Because I put the competition post in the same release as all the podcast information on Facebook, which means it was kind of hidden in the See More button.
Yes, and no one saw more.
So nobody's won the Reloading with Rosie mug.
Which is one of the best mugs we've had, and I can actually see it. And I've been eyeing up that mug. Do we have any more of those?
I think I've got 6 of them.
Okay. So we're going to be putting up the same competition for a Reloading with Rosie mug, and just look out for it. And this time I'm going to put it on Instagram as well.
So go on Instagram and Facebook. Yeah, it'll be a picture-related one, isn't it? We want to see what you're doing at this time of year because all the seasons are open. The Reloading with Rosie is a... which, out of context, you're like, what the hell is that?
Who's doing what with Rosie?
There is a reloading, as an ammunition reloading series called Reloading with Rosie that was done in conjunction with Edgar Brothers and Hornady. And that is, I think there's 5 parts of it, and it's currently on YouTube. And it's the basics of reloading. She brings in experts to explain the different steps. So if you reload or you're thinking about reloading, you can go and check that out. And even better still, you can enter the competition. You can get a Reloading with Rosie mug.
Fantastic.
There you go.
Now, I was just going to say, now we've got another competition, but that is the competition.
Now we've got a guest.
We do, yeah.
On this week's show, we have Ben O'Brien, formerly from Yeti, where a lot of people will know him from. He has a rather good Instagram, and he is also a podcaster, and we've mentioned his podcast before. His podcast is The Hunting Collective, and
we put out a blog post about not just his but other podcasts a week ago.
It is one of my top podcasts now to listen to in the hunting space.
It is on the subscribing list.
It is indeed. He is on the show. We talk for quite some length. I think this is going to be like a 2-hour podcast.
Yeah, it's over 2 hours, I think.
We talk a bit about Nepal because, interestingly, he was hunting in the same place that I was in last year in Nepal. So we talk about that experience for a bit, his time at Yeti and the production of those films and what was involved there, some of his earlier life as a hunting editor for some of the big name publications in the States. We dig into meat and hunting ethics as well. We end up asking him about what he's doing now because now he's left Yeti, and a whole bunch of other people in the industry that he's had some amazing experiences with. You name any big named hunter globally, and it does seem that Ben O'Brien has had something to do with them or hunted with them or knows them personally. And you'll know that if you listen to his podcast because he's had a lot of those great guys.
And we had a lot of fun recording it with him.
We did.
Well.
Yeah, it was a good laugh tonight.
Yeah, it was. It was really
Despite the fact that we started at midnight. It
was really good.
So I've been really pleased to learn more about Ben's background because although I listen to his podcast, like ours, you're always speaking to other people and trying to glean information from them. So it was great to have him on the other side and be able to talk through some of his experiences, and I've learned a lot tonight. It's been great. It's been invigorating.
It has. It's been. I don't feel like it's as late as
I really don't know.
In other news, Modern Huntsman Volume 2 is very much on the way. And if you want to get your hands on it when it comes into the country first, I'm talking about the UK or Europe, then pre-order it now on the website, because if you pre-order it, it means that you will get the first batch that comes into the country. Yes. Many of you have, so thank you. greatly appreciated.
I'm beyond excited to see what they're doing with this.
Really cool stuff.
I know for a fact that Tyler Sharp and Charles Post have been together for the last little while, putting the finishing touches together.
And I am off to Norway in 3 weeks. 3 weeks time, I will be in Norway, doing another piece for
another issue,
which
we can't tell you anything about.
No, we can't say anything about it, but. It's crazy. We're already like planning that far ahead because issue 2 is not even out. But
no, it's not.
But yeah, going to be in Norway, so that's going to be fun. I always love it when I go to Norway.
That's the next trip away, isn't it?
Apart
from fishing tomorrow.
Yeah, and then we're in Ireland.
Oh yeah, we've got a big trip to Ireland. Yeah.
Ireland after that, and then I can't remember where else we're off to.
There's a few things.
Yeah, there's a few things here and there.
Imminently, we've got a few days off. We're fishing up in north of Aberdeenshire for a day and a bit after this podcast finishes recording, and then next week we're going up to the area around Loch Ness
fishing
with our cousin.
That's work. Our work is finding out if there's any fish
in the river.
In the river, genuinely, that is our job, to find out how it fishes. So
we're not going to enjoy it at all.
No,
because it's only work.
It's serious work, and I've got to find out. Yeah, what fish and
we've actually had a pretty good week because we're doing that next week, and on Tuesday we spent the day at the shooting range, which was also work.
We did.
Important work.
We did.
You did a live video on Instagram, actually. We had a lot of angry messages from people who were having to sit in their office watching us on the shooting range.
Yeah. Well, we had all the rifles out then, and we were testing them.
Testing loads, new ammo,
long range,
new scopes,
longish range, not super long range for some people.
I bought a new gong.
Yeah, it does go gong. And Byron managed to shoot the bolt off it, and it fell off. So that was the end of our fun because we didn't want to walk all the way up the range to go. And
to be fair, it was the end of the day. We were wrapping up. I think that's about it. I think this podcast is going to be long enough.
Yeah, I think it will be.
We hope that you all enjoy, and you'll hear from us again in 2 weeks. Ben, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. It's definitely beer o'clock here because it's 5 to midnight. It's a slightly earlier time over in Bozeman, Montana. How are you doing? It's a new move for you in Montana. It's a recent move.
Yeah, freshly arrived. Thanks for having me on, of course.
Pleasure.
Yeah, freshly arrived. It is happy hour here. It's just about 5 to 5. So I imagine we can both have a beer.
Good. What part of the States have you come from to go to Montana?
I moved from Texas to Montana. I was in Texas for the last 4 years for my job at Yeti Coolers. Originally from the East Coast, but enjoyed my time in Texas. A lot of barbecue, a lot of beer, a lot of fine folks and music down there.
A lot of guns.
I was just going to say barbecue. That is what I think of when I think of Texas.
Well, you would be right in thinking that. There's plenty of that down there. Yeah, there's plenty of guns. I'll give you that too. It's a fun place, man. It's a fun culture. They're proud of who they are and their heritage, and it is unique. And same, hopefully, to discover Montana. We're looking to, my family and I, looking to stay in Montana for hopefully quite some time. That's our plan.
Good. No, we have neither of us have been to North America, but we have plans to go soon. And as we were saying just before we started to record, Montana and Bozeman and Montana is particularly high on the list because we know an increasing number of people there.
We know more people in Montana than we do in the rest of the United States. So.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
That's probably a good thing if you like to go hunting.
Yeah,
I would say you'll have a friend somewhere with an elk spot and a mule deer spot and an antelope spot. So yeah, you'll be in good shape.
It's always a good excuse. Now, I wanted to start. We're going to do a bit of the history. I want to talk about Yeti and a whole heap of other things. But we're going to start in maybe a slightly strange place. But I think it'll be a good step off for the rest of this podcast because you and I have a connection that you're probably not all that aware of. Because 6 months after you were in Nepal, I was in exactly the same location with the same outfitter doing the same hunt I was filming. My brother wasn't there because, one of the main reasons was at that point he couldn't walk so well because he'd just fallen down a ditch and knackered his knee. So I was alone, but so when I've heard you talking about Nepal on podcasts, and I've obviously seen the film that's come out from Yeti with Cole Kramer and that in it and yourself, it was kind of weird because I'd lived that just 6 months after you. So I wanted to talk about Nepal with you first as a kickoff for this.
Yeah, I'm glad there's somebody else that has suffered that. Speak about
it's Daryl, you can feel free to chip in to both of us and ask anything, being that you haven't experienced that firsthand.
I haven't experienced it, but because we're editing the film, I've seen it.
Yeah, you've kind of lived it.
I've lived it through film. Yeah, many times.
As trips go, what was Nepal like from you, sort of out of your own mouth?
Yeah. It was there's so many things. It's hard to kind of boil it down.
Yeah, it's okay. We got time.
Yeah, I think first and foremost for me, it was a bit of a test of my abilities. How far you can stretch your abilities and how far you can stretch your mind and your body, and not. It really was less about hunting abilities because we didn't do a whole lot of hunting. We just did a whole lot of walking towards the destination, and then we saw the sheep and we pulled the trigger. So most of it was just, at the end and looking back on it was just how far could I stretch, myself, my physical abilities, my mental abilities, my endurance, in both those facets, So it was more of a personal test than it was, a trek to get a certain animal or, have a certain experience. And it definitely was it stood up to those expectations and more because I was certainly tested, and I look forward to going back one day to see if given those same tests I can succeed the way I did there and challenge myself again because that's what it was to me, just one big challenge.
Well, we'll get into that because I know it was it was tough. But how did what I don't know is how did that trip to that place come about?
Sure.
What was the catalyst?
So Cole Kramer obviously is a Yeti ambassador, and who I worked with in my role at Yeti, and him and I became pretty fast friends, and we hunted together in December. I would say December of 2016 in Kodiak Island, where he guides, and we hunted blacktail deer on Kodiak, and we got it's a whole nother podcast about that story. We got stuck on the island, frozen rivers, and all that, and got stuck there for a few days, and we had a lot of time in a windblown tent to discuss our life's goals and our hunting goals. And he kept bringing up Nepal, and I kept just kind of inside my head like, yeah, right, okay, Nepal, because he had recently been to Azerbaijan, and my thought was, that's the ends of the earth for me. I'm no Jim Shockey. I'm not. That's not in my wheelhouse, especially where I came from. I'm happy to do any of those things when those opportunities arise, but I didn't really see it as a reality. But he pitched it hard to me there in Kodiak, and then later on pitched it again as something he wanted to do. And my original reaction was, hey, we'd love to support you. We support everything you do as an ambassador of our company, but that's not something that we would do a film on or follow you along on. It's something we support you any way we could. But it turned pretty quickly when I talked to our content team and some of our film production folks internally, and they started mentioning Renan Ozturk's name as a person who might be interested in filming something like that. And if you guys know Renan, he's a renowned filmmaker. He was one of the top climbers in the world. He's was filmed Meru with Conrad Anker and Jimmy Chen.
Amazing film.
An amazing film. And so this for this person, he's a Nat Geo photographer. He's one of the more prolific guys in the outdoor space. And when his name started getting bandied about, and then when I heard he was into the idea, Cole and I, kind of mutually pushed the gas pedal down to the floor, and we're, trying to make it happen because it seemed like a reality. And that was in January, and we ended up leaving in late March. So
that was very quick.
Yeah, we did not have much time to train mentally or physically. In fact, I just kind of threw together a training regimen and just knew that I was gonna suffer a little bit.
Wow. Yeah, no, I had a little bit more notice than that to go film it. Not a lot. But it was because it was a bit later than you. You had a lot of snow, which we didn't have. So it was slightly different conditions. But had you ever been to India, Nepal, that part of the world before, or did you also have the culture shock on top of what we'll get into, sort of as you were going up the mountains at high altitude?
Yeah, no, culture shock for sure. I had been, traveled around the world a bit, but I had not been to that part of the world at all. The closest I'd come is to hunt driven boars in Bulgaria, and just remembering that culture shock. It was nothing like the culture shock when you land in Kathmandu. I don't know that coming from where I come from that there's a culture shock that would measure to that one. I mean, it's this fury of dust and people and noises, and it's an affront to pretty much every sense I have as an American, as an American or a human, either one.
It is very unique, and I'd spent a bit of time working in India some years before, and it was kind of similar, but I enjoyed my experience in Nepal a whole heap more. It was kind of the same type of people, the same kind of mix of religions and cultures, but in a kind of different atmosphere. And yeah, as challenging as it was to be so different, even from us here in the UK, I was just looking around, like when you walk around Kathmandu and you're in amongst the people, and every corner you go around, there's another little temple and place that people are praying. It is so far removed from what we see day to day walking around our streets. It's kind of hard to take it all in.
Yeah. I mean, it is. It becomes this a version of culture, and you can't, like you said, when you walk around Kathmandu, which we did a couple of nights before we took off for the Himalayas, you find yourself not able quite to sit and focus on one thing for very long, because it's just a beehive of activity. And for me, my biggest stress, my biggest worry during those first couple of days before we left off for camp, I just remember being very worried that I wasn't going to be able to take it all in, and I would never properly understand what I was looking at, and I didn't have enough time to kind of sit and contemplate where I was and the culture that was here and learn. And I felt like I was missing too much, just because there's so much there to take in.
And it's very fast because it's so busy.
Yeah, and everything's happening fast. Cars are rushing by, people are rushing by. There's moments in time that kind of just feel like they won't quite stop for you when you have your tourist hat on, or at least in that, you kind of feel a little bit lost in the speed of it when you're there. At least I did.
Did you have? I know for me, there was two kind of apprehensions I had prior to actually even getting on the plane to going. One was, I knew that we had a couple of days before going to the mountains, and I really didn't want to get ill because I knew it was going to be tough anyway. And when I was in India, it took me about 6 days, and then I was as ill as a dog, iller than I've ever been in my life since. And the second was, I had no measure for how my body coped with altitude. I keep reasonably fit. I've done a lot of stuff at kind of the extremes of what my body can do, but I've never done altitude.
We've lived at sea level most of our life.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. No, I think all that stuff is true. You don't, as far as like, even when I say, hey, we tried to train, I think the reality is, especially with altitude, is that altitude's not to be messed with. I mean, further you go up, the more serious your situation gets, even if you're dealing with it well. I mean, it is a momentary lapse. An edema happens, cerebral, pulmonary. Those things happen in moments. It's not a long, most of the time, it's not a long, drawn-out process.
And it's no joke.
Yeah, I just want people that are listening to this, as you think about, high-altitude hunts of any kind, whether it's sheep hunting, in Nepal or hunts in the States or in Canada, these aren't things to mess around with. And you could train all you want, and that's, your training and your fitness level is not a predictor of how you will deal with altitude. It just isn't. And so, really it's an awareness of the danger, and it's an awareness of how you'll deal with it when and if it arises. And if you have those things, you'll be prepared, but you can never truly be prepared for what that altitude may do to you, because there's a myriad of things that could happen.
And that was the thing that bugged me the most, because it didn't really matter what I did before I left. Apart from knowing what I might go through, like you say, there's nothing you can do to really prepare for it. Diamox is the pills that they give you for it.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of people before, when I said, telling friends and stuff, I'm going to Nepal, I said, have you ordered your Viagra yet? Did you get that?
Yes, I got that. I got that
and
too.
I thought they were pulling my leg, but legitimately, I actually ended up eventually phoning my doctor because I wanted to get the Diamox just in case. And I said, look, I don't know whether people have been pulling my leg, but this is what they told me. He said, no. He said, for years, that was the prescription for a high altitude. He said, but it's changed, and however, the last few years, they have something better than that now, which is Diamox. So we did actually have that with me, but I took half a tablet of that, and it made me feel really ill. So I never took.
I mean,
it the rest of the trip,
Viagra is dual use. So, I mean, maybe it's a good option.
There was like me, Simon, and 30 male Sherpas.
20 Sherpas and some Viagra.
So I don't know if it would have had much use in the mountains, but
you don't make a lot of friends walking around the effects of Viagra in the mountains. They're like, listen, man, calm down. We haven't seen a sheep yet.
Yeah,
a few donkeys.
There's not a whole lot going on up there.
No, there really isn't.
That'd help you out with that part of the effect. Yeah, I ended up taking Diamox because I had to. But our doctors and folks, when I went to get my shots and things to prepare to go over there, they weren't adamant, but they were like, it would be a good idea to cycle Diamox before you go.
Mm.
And they talked me through that. I decided not to do it, on advice. We, you know how it is over there. I mean, we had a medic in our production crew. One of our producers was pretty much an expert in mountain medicine, as I came to find out. And so I was able to talk to them. He led groups all over the Himalayas as a tour guide and a guide in a lot of ways. So we had that because, as you well know, the language barrier, you can't just call up Raju or call up Man Bahadur and say, "Hey, Man,
no,
what kind of boots are you wearing?" You just can't you can't do that. So the language barrier. It was nice for in our case to have English-speaking American native living in Kathmandu to talk to, and that helped a little bit. And that's what I think was maybe to a detriment for me, because I got to talk to him and hear all his stories and all the things he would worry about in trips like this. And it became pretty heavy after talking to him a few times, really quickly understanding that this wasn't something that should take lightly, and I should be prepared. And I wasn't nervous going into it, but I just knew. I had done mountain hunts before. I knew what danger was, and I just kind of knew in the back of my mind that this is going to be could go bad, and I just need to be prepared for that and know what to do.
I was chuckling to myself there because I was thinking, if you could have phoned up one of the guides or one of the Sherpas and said, "What boots are you wearing?" they probably would have said flip-flops.
Yeah, they would have been like, "Do you have any duct tape?" Flip-flops? That's what.
And those guys,
Crocs.
They're just nails. I mean, not man, who we'll talk about, and we referenced in the previous podcast we actually recorded in Nepal. But some of the guys, some of the porters, it was crazy what they were wearing, and they were just hard men. And, well, I say men, boys. Some of them were like 16, 17 years old.
Yeah, and I think it's not, if you read a lot of the books, the early books from Nepal and some of the early explorers, they would collect Sherpas and porters by going village to village and kind of saying, who wants to go? It's a little more organized than that now, but it's also a little bit the same. I mean, they're going from town to town and recruiting, the best of the best and saying, come to the mountain with us. And they just kind of have what they have.
Yeah, which isn't a lot.
Which is nothing. I mean, it's to us, it's nothing, less than nothing at some levels, And there's if you're looking to get humbled by a place and its people, that's a good place to start. Because every time I would be like, man, I guess this is a rough wind in this Sitka gear. It's getting a little chilly, and I look over, there'd be a fella in a t-shirt and flip-flops with a 200-pound load bounced on his head.
Yeah.
It does always make me laugh, though, when you do look at the skier, especially boots being a prime example there. They're walking up in flip-flops, probably some Crocs taped up, and they achieve all what you can do in like a 300-pound pair of boots, and you can have complaints about your
and they
boots
do it
afterwards.
faster than we do.
And then
Faster.
Another guy, Ed Stafford, he first man to ever walk the full length of the Amazon jungle. He started in boots, finished I think the last year in Crocs.
Yeah.
So, it just shows you that.
I mean, they do. Part of it is that they do live it.
Yeah,
they
they
live
do.
it every day. But on top of that, they're also hard people.
Yeah, well, they're hard people because that's all they know, and it's not hard to them. That's just their life.
No, it's
but
just
yeah,
life,
I think, I think once you you hunt around on your home turf or in your home country, and you really never you get perspective, but in bite-sized chunks. Your perspective is. An animal might give you perspective. A certain terrain might give you some perspective. You learn in bite-sized chunks. But when you go, if you want to gather some perspective on life, on what a challenge really is, on what hardship really is, I mean, you go to Nepal and you look those people in the eye, and you watch them. You hear them play music in the morning on their flutes and wooden recorders, and you hear them laughing at night, and then you see what they do in the daytime. You see that they'll take double loads for double pay, which means they're carrying 250 pounds in a basket bounced on their foreheads. There's no way. Then you come home and you're, in my case, like you're sitting in traffic in Austin, Texas, and you just laugh. You're like, man, this sucks. Wait a minute. You just kind of chuckle to yourself.
Reality.
Yeah, and there's this like bit of reality. So yeah, for me, I got a sheep and it was great, but that's trivial.
Yeah, compared to the rest of it. One of the other things that I really loved is they were always very, very positive and very welcoming. And it wasn't because they were there because they were being paid to be there that they were like that, I don't think. I think that was just how they were. Like you were saying, round camp at night when they're playing music, you see them interacting with you can't understand what they're saying because they're speaking their native language. But with very little, they were very happy. And I think that's something we tend to think in the modern world that we live in. I'm sitting in our office looking at all the shit that we've got around us. Some of it we need for work, but there are a lot of people in the world who are very happy with a lot less.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's like a depth of soul, not to get all deep on you guys, but there's like a depth of soul that requires. Like you have to be happy. You have to be internally and at the soul level happy to endure the things that they endure. Like you can't be begrudging that kind of work because you'll never get it done. You just won't. I mean, you can't do what those folks do on a daily basis. I mean, when we were in they might have been cutting the same tree when you were there, but when we were in base camp there in Dule Yarsa, they were cutting on this big oak tree with the dullest axe I've ever seen. Might as well just been hitting the handle on this tree. And this tree must have been 30 feet around. I mean, it was a giant tree. And when we left, there was just two, one younger guy and an older villager, just beating on this tree like that's the only thing they were ever going to do. And when we left, I thought that it was going to take them a year to get that tree down on the ground. And when we came back 6, 7, 8 days later, it was on the ground, and they were chopping it up for firewood. And so it's just like that. Those little bits, those little moments in time when you realize like life is different here, people are different here, and there is this. I would say a pioneering mentality that 6 days walk to the nearest road is 6 days walk to the nearest road.
It is what it is.
And it's not cumbersome.
There is a reason why the British Army still recruits from there and has one of the most feared regiments on the planet because of their people.
That little analogy that you just painted there, it reminds me of there's a paragraph in Aldo Leopold's book, A Sound County Almanac, where he talks about the appreciating warmth from a fire, and you can never appreciate it the same unless you've cut your own wood. And on a different scale, that's what you've just described there. You will never be able to appreciate what they gain from cooking, and not just warmth, but the cooking and warmth that they gain from a tree like that when most of us go in, flick the switch, and our heating comes on. It's a different depth of appreciation for what you have.
Yeah, and then like when you sign up for a hunt like that, to document it like you and I were trying to do, but also just to experience it, I feel bad because I've run into some folks that have been there either prior to my going or after my going, that the first thing they did was show me the sheep they killed. Like, look at this sheep. And I'm like, oh yeah, I recognize that guy. There's Raju or Man or any of the other folks that we met. I'm like, that's nice. You were probably somewhere close to where I was. But I feel sad that you just showed me the sheep, because I think the sheep would be about the 15th photo I'd get to, the 15th story I'd tell you before if you asked me what my trip to Nepal was like. And that exactly what you're saying is being able to gather that from them, to take that gift back home with you, to understand that, there's just some things we're lucky to have, the fortune we have, but we just need to know that there'll be gaps in our existence, gaps in the way that we live, because we will never truly know the mindset of those people. And we've kind of got a pretty lucky glimpse into that, because there's not that many people that go up that valley.
No.
And do what you did and what I was able to do. There's just not that many people.
There's no other reason to be there, really, as an outsider.
Yeah, I mean, how many people go to Everest Base Camp a year?
Loads.
That's not loads, thousands of people. And so
it's like 20,000 a year.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous number now.
That's ridiculous, and it's dozens of people that go through Dule Yarsa on a yearly basis, and so you just have a unique glimpse into the human existence there that I don't think you would get very many places. Maybe the Chamane tribes of South America or something like that, where you could see those the prism through which they live life, and that's what I took away from it in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. It was.
I just googled the numbers just to make sure. I wasn't too far off. It's 35,000 a year that
go to base camp.
The go to base camp. Yeah.
So what we did in terms of something that is rare and unusual, it surpasses base camp by a long margin.
By a long, I bet you if 50 outsiders a year are in Dule Yarsa, I'd be surprised. There's no way to really know unless you'd ask those guys. And hopefully that number rises, because I hope people can experience that environment and what it means. But it's sometimes when you get on these mountain hunts, you're kind of struck by the beauty of the mountain. I don't remember as much being struck. I mean, I was at some level, but I remember more just being struck by what was right in front of my face than what was far off in the distance.
Yeah, there's a strange conflict there, because, like you were saying, it would be great if more people went, and I know exactly what you're saying, but so many places that I've been around the world where it is off the beaten track, and I know not many people are going, and I really want to tell, and I very often do, tell the story of how awesome it is, and the experience, and the smell, and the look, and the feel. And then there's that part of me that doesn't really want any more people to go, because I don't want it to be ruined by people.
We've seen it in Scotland. The hidden gems. Every time a newspaper or something finds one of these hidden gems, they publish where it is, and then it's mobbed by people, and then the litter starts, and all the rest of the problems that come with it. I mean, I think hauling litter up in Nepal and dump. Well, they do it on Everest, I guess.
Yeah.
It happens all over the world.
But I say that, and I'm a bit of a hypocrite, because we're filmmakers. So my job is showing off places, to showcase beautiful places in the world and tell great stories. That's what we love to do, is tell great stories. So by that,
responsible people coming.
We're trying. It'd be good if it's responsible people, but it doesn't matter. I think every step and influence from outside cultures anywhere in the world, to some extent, dilutes it a bit. I mean, you see it all over the world. You look at South American tribes even, and they're wearing European football shirts.
Yeah.
It takes something away, and I don't know whether we're really giving them anything that makes their life any better.
I wonder that too. Like I always wonder kind of what, if it's a selfish endeavor, like how selfish it is. What my going over there, what I really gave to them, and what, we tell ourselves they're jobs, and it's real. I mean, those jobs are real. There's 35 people. We stand around and had a tipping ceremony where we handed out cash to 35 very happy porters and workers and cooks. And
that was a cool experience. People. A really strange experience for me, that.
Yeah, strange for me too, because I thought normally I just this is just like a very brief, short handshake where we don't celebrate, the handover of cash. But they do it differently, because they, and it, just another part of their culture I respect. They've earned that. Each person has has achieved something small in the greater expedition, so they deserve a little call out and some round of applause at some level. So I like that, but you're right. We go through that here in America. I mean, it's the national monument debate is a great one. National monuments here are set aside to preserve certain beautiful landscapes and certain antiquities that we hold dear. But at the same time, when you put something on make something a national monument, all the tourists put it on their tour
GPS,
trips, so they can GPS. Oh, I'll go over to the Bears Ears National Monument. That's great. That's a national monument. Must be important. So they go over there and check it out. So at the same time, the act of preserving a place, even in that act, is can have an ill effect on what you're trying to do. So I think I know that I respect that place and those people. In going back, I may do it differently if I ever do get to go back. But I think appreciating the experience and providing those jobs to those people is enough for me.
Yep.
Could we do it better? Sure, we could do it better. But I think that's enough.
I want to ask you about national monuments a bit later, but just to explain it, especially to our sort of UK and European audience, because I know it's something you've talked about a lot and it is big debate in the States. But just to continue with this and to kind of get to being in the mountains and where you've already alluded to it, but where the kind of difficulty started for you, because there was a lot to overcome for you to kind of get to the end of the trip.
Yeah. There was a lot.
What happened, Ben? What happened?
What happened? I'll tell you. When I got to, I was in Kathmandu, I was a little incredulous. I was like, I'll walk around, I'll breathe the air, I don't care. Like I'm just gonna. This is me. I'm experiencing it. If I get sick, I get sick. This is what it is.
And I bet you Samsha said to you, "Don't walk around in town," didn't he?
Yeah, they were like, just stay at the hotel. It's a very nice hotel. I believe his father or one of his family members own the hotel. It's very nice. There was actually a wedding going on. We had some drinks at. But we walked around for one night, breathed the air. Of course, I had, by the time we were in the helicopter headed up to the drop-off point, I had some respiratory stuff going on. I had basically a cold at that point. It wasn't, my lungs weren't ready for altitude, that's for sure. But the first day in the hike up to Dule Yarsa, I felt great. And we had snow, as you said, we had snow on our trip. So we were stuck in base camp in Dule Yarsa for an extra day. And during that extra day, most of our American crew was sick. And I was the only one that was feeling good. So I remember Cole Kramer being in his tent, unable to even crawl out the door to sight his rifle in.
Oh, really?
And I was doing acclimation hikes up and down the hills there behind Dule Yarsa.
So you're like, I'm the man. Bring it on.
I was hitting my wife up on the sat phone. I'm an alpha male. I may just live here forever. I think I'm the strongest of the tribe. And Cole was very sick that day, and Renan Ozturk was having some trouble that evening. And so I saw that and I thought, this is going to have to be coming for me at some point. But you kind of get wrapped up in the experience. And so we left out a day late because there's a good bit of snow on the pass, on that first pass that goes under the Jalpa Peaks there. And we left a day late and we got going and I felt great. I think it was probably at least 1,500 to 2,000 foot elevation gain that day, coming from 10,000 to about 12,000.
Yeah, it's quite a hike.
That's quite a hike. Yeah, you go through the oak forest, live oaks, and get up into the Alpine during that trip. And it was pretty lively that day. There was singing and hooting and hollering. We were filming. We were all feeling pretty good. And we got to the very first pass to go down into the valley in our wonderful, I don't know if you even call them donkeys, they're more like mules, but the mules that were rolling with us got stuck in the snow on one of these pretty thin, pretty small goat trails that are, as you well know, that
1 foot wide.
Mountain. Yeah, 1 foot wide. And so we're having to kind of slide off the hill to let the mules go back by. They now have to go back to camp because they can't make it through the pass because of snow. And now the porters and Sherpas have to take on extra loads and go forward. And so as we're reconvening and figuring that all out, I remember very distinctly filming with my phone, and there's some part of it in the actual film, the Yeti film, where I'm standing there with my phone filming, and then the next thing I remember, I'm looking up at the sky, wondering why I'm laying on the ground. And I don't remember falling over. I don't remember feeling dizzy. I just kind of remember being on the ground and wondering why I was there. And then very quickly realizing, everybody was starting to go forward, so I stood up and started walking. And our medic and one of our producers and our medic, Ben Ayers, turned around and I think saw the manner in which I was walking. I must have had a bit of a limp or I must have been swerving on the trail a little bit. So he came back to check on me. He said, let's sit down, and are you feeling okay? I was like, man, I'm feeling a little bit lightheaded. I think I might have, kind of passed out a little bit over there.
Just a bit.
That might not be good. Just a bit. And as we were sitting there chatting, at some point during that exchange, I look over across the valley there, and I see a wolf, a black wolf. I'm looking over, and I'm examining him. I say, hey, Ben, there's a wolf over there. We should get our binos out. And he just looked at me, and at some level, he just said, shit. This dude has lost it. I think he knew right then, that we were dealing with something that was more serious than just like a little bit of dizziness. And I was convinced there was a wolf there. I mean, I was like, look, you can see it right there, man. It's standing broadside, 100, 200 yards away.
Wow.
And we just had this exchange where he was just trying to keep me calm. He was like, okay, well, that's cool. Well, let's let that alone.
Moving on.
Yeah. We'll put that in a box.
So then, we'll put that over here. We'll put that in things that aren't there. We'll put that on the things that aren't there list and move on. And so he's like, stand up and let's see how far we can get. You think you can walk? I'm like, dude, I am fine. Don't worry. And we stand up, and I immediately realize my head is floating away from my shoulders at a pretty prolific pace. And so we get going maybe 15, 20 steps, and I'm like, okay, man, I'm seeing it now. This isn't, I'm feeling dizzy, lightheaded. I can't really kind of get my thoughts straight. I'm seeing now that something's going on. And so he's like, here's the plan. I've got some Diamox. We're going to make it as far as we can make it, and we're going to get you some Diamox, get you back to camp, which at that point was maybe only a mile away, maybe 2 miles. Back down to the camp in the river valley, and we'll get you some Diamox, and we'll see if we can get you feeling right. And not too long after that, I was following him down the trail, and at this point I've kind of got my hand on his pack as we're walking. And I look over at this little L-shaped turn on the trail, and there's a baby. And I thought to myself, that's not good.
You're in the shit when you're seeing wolves and babies in the mountains.
Yeah, man. And I'm thinking, I got 2 options here. One, that's really a baby, and no one has noticed this baby, and I need to help the baby. And the second thing is, there's no baby there, and I'm going home. And so I was like, listen, not for lack of a better way to say it, but screw this baby. I'm going to act like it doesn't exist. And if it happens to be here, it's really on the baby. I don't know how it got here or why it's
if
there.
If the baby got there by itself, it can make its way out.
Yeah, it's the baby's fault for even being there. And so, I kind of put that on the baby, and I just kept going. And I remember looking back and just thinking, blinking my eyes, thinking, this isn't happening. I'm not seeing this stuff. It's not. And to me, it was as real as could be. And we kept going, and I just, maybe 100 yards after that, I just I got to stop, man. He just collapsed. And so he gave me some Diamox. We had some food, I remember. And we just tried to have a normal conversation and try to joke about it. And he was doing good, but I ended up coming down into camp that night, basically with him holding my shoulders, walking behind me, and me kind of leaning on my trekking poles, going one step at a time. And I just remember going down the hill into that first camp, not really knowing if my feet or my trekking poles were actually hitting the ground or not, or what they were even doing. And so I was pretty out of it. And they got me down into camp finally, put me in a big old Patagonia puffy jacket, and I kind of sat in the tent. And they were asking me questions and filming me, and I was saying some pretty morbid things. I was out of it. I think they asked me at one point, hey, what are you feeling right now? I said, well, we need to know the name of this mountain, because this is where, we're all going to die. So we need to know, what's the name of this mountain? So I was like, I need to know that. So I got the Diamox, and eventually I made it to my actual sleeping tent and passed out and woke up with Ben Ayers, the medic, kind of sleeping right next to me, clinging his medical bag. And I know that evening as I was sleeping, they had discussed, like, let's get the helicopter in here, just get him out, and let's not mess around. Luckily enough for me, I woke up the next morning, and I was feeling a little bit more like myself and could eat a little bit, and they put me on an acclimation hike, and I made it, and I did pretty good, and we kept on going, and then I got the next day I got the Kathmandu flu. That was out of every.
That was all altitude then.
That was all altitude, as far as I could tell.
Yeah.
Later on, our medic was like, "Look, I think part of it was you're hitting this altitude, you were dehydrated, from you just having a cold." And then this illness hit you, further dehydrated you, so it's kind of like a combination of
perfect storm
of things that just kind of resulted. It wasn't, any edema or any real serious thing, more like acute mountain sickness, something like that. Would probably be a good way to describe it.
Brutal.
And then I got to feeling a little bit better. We got up the canyon there. Main guide Mon, spotted some sheep up the canyon, so we started glassing those sheep and radioed back to the rest of the crew to come up and meet us. And well, at that time, he started glassing sheep and tried to show me where they were, and I couldn't even lift my head up. I was so sick. It's like, I just knew at that point, like, this is going to be bad. And so, my stomach was rolling. I couldn't really move, and by the time everybody had come to catch up with us, I could barely get off the snowbank to do anything. But somehow, I don't even really remember how. Somehow I made it to the next camp, which was a good ways up there. And when I made it to the next camp, I just fell over and passed out in the snow. And just kind of crawled in the tent once they had put it together and slept for, who knows how long, 14 hours, and only waking up to throw up or try to run to the latrine.
Was it the blue tent? We had a blue tent for that.
Yeah, yep. Hopefully not the same blue tent. Hopefully they had got a new tent for your trip.
I think it might have been the same blue tent. I'm sure we were probably gripping the same pole.
Probably. Yeah, had I known that, I'd have put a picture of myself in there, maybe like a selfie. Be like, Ben was here. And it wasn't good, boys. It wasn't good.
Well,
so yeah, I mean, it was those first 3 days, 3.5, 4 days was just an assault on, physically, mentally, kind of an assault on everything that I knew, all hardships that I knew. And Cole went up the mountain and killed his sheep. I couldn't even get out of the tent the entire day. I barely could eat a handful of rice. They kept bringing all this food to the tent for me to eat, and I couldn't even look at it. And
it's a good job that this podcast isn't for Visit Nepal, because I don't think anybody would be going.
Hey, we led off with the perspective part,
Yeah, we did.
These are the gory details of that perspective.
But you pulled through that, like, eventually.
You pull through.
You pulled through, and you were able to get up onto the mountain with a gun.
I did, yeah. I did with a gun, yeah. No, Cole Kramer had a tag, so he went up and got his sheep on the first try. And when he came back, and Renan Oster came back, and Ben Ayers came back, these are, in my eyes, expert mountaineers. I mean, these are people that have done things that I could never dream of. I mean, these are experts. I consider myself just a regular guy. And so when I saw the looks on their faces, the frozen facial hair, the wind-burned faces, the collapsing into camp at 11 p.m. after they had left at 5 a.m., and just the way they looked like they had been through a war, and the way I felt, I was immediately like, well, I'm not going to be able to do that. I can't. That trek up the mountain to kill that sheep took, some of the more seasoned mountain hunters, mountain climbers to their limits. And I am about 5% capacity now. So I'm doing the math. I'm like, I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think I can do it. For lack of ego and just at that point being pretty beat down. But to the credit of the people around me, I think they all thought what I thought, but they never, let me hear it. They just said, let's just try to get up here to the next, let's go just right outside of camp. We see some sheep. Let's see if we can get you a shot. That was the first day. And the second day was like, let's just go, and we'll go as far as you can, and we'll see. Don't carry a pack. Don't worry about even carrying binos. Just trekking poles and yourself, and we'll do the rest. And I made it up up the far pass down the valley on day 6, and it was a trudge, man. It was 2,000 feet up to about 17,000 feet, 17,300 I think it was. It was about 2,000 feet up through this post-holing through frozen over snow, 10 feet of frozen over snow and these passes, and then getting to the top and realizing the sheep were another mile away, to a point where we almost gave up then too. So there was just many points where I almost gave up. Our crew probably almost gave up on me, but nobody ever did. And I eventually made it across the valley and slid on my butt with Raju and Mon down this last slope and climbed up a little ridge, and there the sheep were. And it was a fairly brief affair with the sheep. It's like, there they are. Saw them for the first time, got my rifle out, and was able to kill one in its bed pretty quickly.
Yeah, Raju and Man are incredible guys.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, Man is just, never try to keep up with that guy on that mountain.
It'll kill you.
Yeah, you will die. And I almost did. But yeah, they were incredibly, I think probably in their private moments, they're like, this guy looked pretty fit. He looked like he could get it done. He had a good attitude. I don't know what happened. And that's kind of how that's what they said in the film, and that's what they were saying in person. It's like it was a little confusing to everybody, but it's just,
it happens.
That place. Place is.
When I got to the top camp that we camped at, I think it was 14,500 feet in terms of camp. And for the 5 days we were there, I woke up every morning with a headache, but like a bad stiff neck headache that would take like an hour to go. The milky tea that they'd bring every morning helped it go a little bit. And some of the guys suffered more than I did, but I had one day in particular where if I hadn't have had a job to do, I needed to be there filming. I wouldn't have gone up the mountain because I just felt like death. But yeah, so it sounds like you had it bad, but there is one. Well, there's more than one, but I can think of one immediate major positive from that story that you've just told us, is that nothing you ever do from now until the end of days is going to feel as tough as that did.
Yeah.
Everything's going to be easy.
That's kind of why I want to go back.
Yeah.
I'd like to, if I can, I'd like to raise that bar and continually raise it. So the rest of your life, I can't. I don't know if anyone, yourself or me or anyone has done something like that, and it doesn't have to be Nepal. It could be really anything that challenges you to to well past what you thought you were able to do in the situation. And I do often think, if I was healthy, what would it have been like for me? But it wasn't that way, and so I was forced to get up every morning and do what I could do, and keep doing that until I got what I came there for, which was a sheep, and really just the satisfaction of knowing that I was able to push through and do something like that. And if you live the rest, like say, you live the rest of your life with this thing in the back of your mind that
it's in the bank.
Every obstacle you come to, you're like, I've done harder than that. Oh man, I've had harder days than this one.
For sure.
And when I run into people that live in urban environments and live very soft lives, and the smallest obstacle gets put in front of them and they turn away from it, you just like, man, what could you achieve if you knew how much you could do?
What is possible?
If you knew how.
What
is possible?
It becomes a mental game, and it's funny, I've just done a trip to New Zealand not that long ago, and the guide there who I was with, he was saying, you'd be amazed how many people come and hunt with him, and he's like a mountain goat, this guy. It's tough terrain. It's different to Nepal. They don't have the altitude, but it's technically can be just as difficult. He's saying the amount of guys that come, super fit guys. I mean, he said, you put them in the gym, he said to me, you put them in the gym against me, and he says, they'll smash me any day. He says, but the problem is that over an extended period of time on these big wilderness hunts, quite often that sort of mental ability to overcome the discomfort of wet boots and those things that you can't really train for unless you're doing the activity, it just breaks them. And they can be the fittest guys in the world, but they can't deal with it. Yeah.
Well, we came back from Nepal in April, and then I was in New Zealand doing some of the gnarliest mountain terrain in the world 2 months later. And had had an experience where I had been there the year before to New Zealand, and then this is my second trip to the same river valley, and I found myself over like almost too much enjoying the hardship. Like just almost every step forward was like, you know what I gained in Nepal? Like, this is what I can do now. Like I just enjoying this like new version of myself that I had chiseled out in Nepal, and enjoying this, like, this isn't that hard now. I came here last year and I was just, befuddled by how a person could get to the top of this mountain. And here now I am gliding to the top and doing it 3 days in a row and killing a tar and being happy, and not feeling like this is a hardship. So, once you've chiseled that stuff away and you get to experience the benefit in tangible form, you really do see that. I was in that podcast I did with Cole on this subject. We talked about going on these wilderness adventures, and it sharpens, the life knife. You go out and you live in our society, in our modern society, and you get dull. Your knife gets dull. You don't really get challenged.
I love that analogy. When podcast you're talking about, I love that analogy, and you're so right. You do get dull.
Yeah, and then you go out and do these wilderness challenges, and it sharpens you. And then you go back and you can cut through life so much easier because now you have that experience behind you. And then a year goes by where you haven't been sharpened, and you start to feel a little bit more tired, a little bit more stressed. Things start to get to you a little bit hard, and that's because you cut through life a little bit tougher without having those perspective gaining experiences like those wilderness hunts are.
The other thing I find is when you go away for, and it doesn't even have to be an extended period of time. It can even be for a couple of days, and you're getting into it, and you're enjoying it, or you're reflecting on it if it's somewhere like Nepal, and realizing that you did enjoy the experience, although maybe not at the time. Is that you return to what is normality, for want of a better way to explain it, and you're kind of looking forward to it because you want the hot shower. But there's also a little bit of you that doesn't want to let go of what you've just left. There's that conflict that always goes back on in my mind from like to and fro as I'm returning to normal life.
That's just the airplane. You think being horrible on the airplane flying back, You're like, take me back to the tent in the mountain.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's we're not, you and I, all three of us are not unique in that. I mean, if you read some of the early explorers in the American West and some of the explorers of that continent, you'll read those same reflections. The reflections of, even Otto Leupold and Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot, and I mean, you can name all these people. You start reading their writings. John Muir is really good at that. I mean, you start to read some of their writings, and you see these same reflections, and they start to treat these wilderness experiences like gifts, things that, and then that led them to want to preserve those places, and that leads me to the same feeling. I feel like the preservation of that place would allow me and everyone else to have those same experiences, and I think that makes us better humans. And so I don't want it to go away, and I don't, I'd rather not have my son or the next generation have less of an opportunity to go do that because it's done so much for me.
You're 100% right there. And I think it's very difficult to take that extra step and act on something to protect it if you haven't fully experienced it or understand it, or to understand it, because you can't then sort of carry that emotion through of what that experience is. So, I mean, you take that the area, the Dorpatan Hunting Reserve in Nepal that we've just been talking about there. You might, people might think that it's great that they run a ballot system, and that's how, and the rangers, they don't call them rangers there, but the guys who were there who work for the government are there to kind of stop the poaching and keep an eye on what's going on, and very happy for a system like that to be in place. But to truly appreciate it and understand how important it is that something like that is protected, you really have to kind of live it and be there and do what you've done. If you look at tar, for example, there they have ballots for tar. Did you see any tar while you were there, Ben?
No. I was on the lookout for. Well, after the day 2, I was just on the lookout for the tent.
Or the baby.
Oh, the baby. Yeah, if that baby's coming back, I was like, just cue the helicopters if that baby comes back. I can't deal with it. Can't deal with imaginary infants in the Himalayas. I'm not. That's what I signed up for. But yeah, I mean, snow leopards, tar. I mean, just even longer gyres, even the griffins that are flying around over there. All those things are like this. You see them, and you're like, it's this. Not mystical, but it's just something that you truly want to. You want to keep those there. You want to keep the habitat there. And I understand pretty early on that I had no real way of knowing how to do that. And I wouldn't be so egotistical as an American to go over there and be like, yeah, keep the ballot system going. It seems like it's working. I was like, look, if this is the way you've determined that I can benefit by coming over here and taking part in this, I'm happy to take part. And I think we err a lot of times in trying to transfer our value system and our models of conservation to these other places because their economic structure isn't the same. Their society and cultural structures don't function like ours do. And our value system, I would love for them to have that, but they don't live in a world where our value system is affordable. They can't.
It's not really relevant, is it?
It's not relevant.
Right.
You can't get up and be like, I must value this animal because it's beautiful and it's majestic. They're like, I'm real hungry and I got to walk 6 days to get a meal, or I got to have that, And so poaching isn't even a concept. It's just there's so much a part of that landscape in the way that they live. It changes, conceptually how you would describe the animals and the people and how they interact. And I've always been pretty aware of not being so foolhardy as to say, like, our way works. Trophy hunting might work here, because as you well know, the government in Nepal is a little bit complicated.
Just a tad.
And just seems like a bunch of people yelling at each other when I was there. And so, I just think I wanted to appreciate it, and I didn't want to overcomplicate my role in it or have so much ego as to think that I was playing some more important role than going over there and providing some dollars and some jobs and telling their stories best I could.
Talking about protection and conservation, but flipping it back to your home and monuments, which we alluded to probably about half an hour ago. Sure. Just, if it is at all possible, explain what has been going on there, because for here we don't have. If you talk about monuments here in the UK, people are going to think it's some sort of physical building,
like a castle,
or something like that. Yeah. Explain what is meant by that. A little bit of the history and what issue you guys are facing right now, just so that we can understand it in Europe a little bit with a bit more clarity.
Yeah, I always fear that I'll butcher the facts.
That's
the
okay.
Things here, but I'll get the concept.
Whatever you tell us, we'll believe, because we don't know any better.
Yeah. In 1342, no, I think in the turn of the century, I want to say 1908, we started to, Teddy Roosevelt and a bunch of visionaries in this country started to realize that they wanted to preserve some landscapes, and so there was a bunch of ways that they did that. National forests, they started the Forest Service early in the turn of the century. And that is really the start of our conservation ideal. And that conservation ideal came from a bunch of really elitists like Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir that were also naturalists and hunters and anglers and appreciates the natural world. So at the turn of the century, there was a movement to conserve these places out west that were at that time getting raped and pillaged by modern expansionism. And we at that time, the railroad was prevalent and refrigeration was prevalent, and the growing urban populations in our country were demanding more food and were demanding more pretty things and buffalo hides, and were demanding more resources from the wildlife.
There's huge market hunting at that time, wasn't there?
Yeah, market hunting is what they'll call it, of course. And they're wholesale killing of mallard ducks, white-tailed deer, wild turkeys, Rocky Mountain elk. Everybody really knows, and It signifies with the bison, the buffalo that were killed en masse for this. I mean, hundreds of feet high piles of buffalo skulls on the plains.
It seems unbelievable. I've seen the pictures, but
yeah,
I still can't quite fathom it.
Yeah, I mean, one of Teddy Roosevelt's writings, he I believe he was in South Dakota when he wrote this, but he said, we rode for miles and miles and we were never in sight of a live buffalo or out of sight of a dead one.
Yeah.
And then I think the next day he might have killed a buffalo or something like that, which is how they did it. But we started to realize that the commodification of wildlife couldn't go on, and that wilderness ideal and the ideal for conservation that we were talking about earlier was born then. And a lot of things came of that, right? And so we talk about a lot of ways that our country put together our value system and our North American model of wildlife conservation. There was a lot of steps. One of these steps was the Antiquities Act, which was passed to allow presidents to set aside certain types of land to be preserved as antiquities. And in the bill, there's a lot of language, and one piece of that language says it should be the smallest area possible to preserve that antiquity. And that antiquity, as you guys said, doesn't have to be a building or a castle or any type of tangible artifact. It could be a place like the Grand Canyon or a place like the Bears Ears National Monument in Utah. Just specifically culturally important pieces of land. Maybe that they have an Indian burial ground. Maybe they have a significant piece of our culture within that piece of land. And the Antiquities Act was there to allow presidents specifically to declare these lands national monuments. And that's where it gets complicated, because national monuments in their current form do a lot of things. They provide some access. They restrict other access. There's a lot of detail and minutia in national monuments that goes uncovered, and I probably don't have enough time to go into all that, but just say...
But you can hunt on national monuments. There's access.
Yes.
They're not closed areas.
No, they're not closed areas. They're closed sometimes to roads. It depends on your definition of access, right? If access is everybody can drive up to them, that's not always the case. But if access is, can you hunt on them, draw a tag, and go take an animal? Yes, most of them, that is the case. But if not all of them, that's the case.
So is it all government-owned land?
Yes.
The
federal government would. Yeah, the federal government owns the land and manages the land. And the other thing that often happens on this land is it is precluded from extraction. So it's precluded from gas and oil or mining of any kind. These national monuments are considered sacred, so we're not going to extract resources from them. And so it's in that phase, like, in our two political parties, the Democrats, Republicans generally are pro-hunting, but they are also pro-extraction. They are pro-oil and gas. They are pro-industry. And on the left, you have folks that are generally not, sometimes anti-hunting, but are environmentalists and preservationists. And so we kind of butted heads with our national monument system, where we said the left side wants to preserve these monuments. They see this as an act of preservation, an act of keeping the industries out of these beautiful places. And the other side of the coin would then say, we want to provide access for hunting by stripping these lands of these monument designations, but also provide access to extraction for people to go in and mine or to extract oil and gas from these places. Because you're talking, in some cases, millions of acres of land that
lots of money.
Yeah, lots of money sitting on those pieces of land. And so it's a very intricate argument where one side, it was a rare case in our politics where one side was like, in my community, we're helping hunters by providing access. And the other side was like, you're hurting hunters by stealing our land. Wait a minute.
Okay.
What are you talking? Somebody's lying here. Somebody's making something up somewhere. And so at the end, there was a specific two monuments, Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears National Monument, specifically probably Bears Ears. But President Barack Obama used the Antiquities Act to preserve a couple of million acres. I don't know. I can't remember the number for Bears Ears. but he used that, I think it was 4 years ago, on his way out of office, to preserve the Bears Ears National Monument. That's in Utah, and there's a lot of tribal significance. It's a beautiful place. It's a pretty red rock canyons and those million acres. Now, when President Donald Trump comes in office, he asks his Montana-based Secretary of Interior, who is in charge of our federal lands and land holdings, to do a review of all the monuments to see which ones are too big and too costly for the government and which ones could be shrunk. According to some of the language that's in the Antiquities Act. And they reviewed, I believe, 21 monuments, and Grand Staircase and Bears Ears were the two they decided to reduce. And that's where the big controversy came.
I see.
Bears Ears was reduced. It's still in litigation. There's still a lot to go there, but they reduced it significantly, which took away protections. And now one side will argue, the left will argue, that Donald Trump and Secretary Zinke only wanted to open up those lands for extraction. They don't care about access to hunting and fishing. They don't care about the antiquities of the land that are present there. They don't care. They just want to open those spaces up so their buddies in oil and gas can make a bunch of money, or their buddies in mining can make a bunch of money. And on the other side, you have, the environmentalists who are saying that we want to protect this land, and the Republicans are saying, well, these folks just want to protect all this. They want to protect way more than the federal government can afford, and they're just trying to shut land off from access to everyone because they want to preserve it. And so that's kind of the two sides of the coin. Now, I'm a hunter, and I like the land, and so I always look at my son and the future of this country and decide, what I feel on those things. And so in this case, I was like, we need, in my mind, the wilderness is not something we're going to get more of. No. It's only something that we'll get less of in the end of the day. Our system of public lands is unique to this country in a lot of ways. Our model of conservation and wildlife stewardship is unique to this country. And those things are far more important than, Donald Trump and Secretary Zinke and the way that they think about access and the way they think about wilderness and the way they think about extraction from those places. So that was the argument, and it was a complicated one, and it continues today, and I'm sure it will continue to pop up. And I will say that the biggest shame in all this is that Bears Ears specifically has become a political football. And so 3 years ago, it was one thing. Today it's another, and maybe if a Democrat gets in office here in a couple of years, they will change it back. But that makes it very hard for the wildlife managers and the stewards of the land on the ground to do any real managing, because it's always in flux on who's doing what and what they're allowed to do and what it really means. And so I think just the land loses in our politics, the people on the ground lose, the tourism dollars suffer, jobs suffer, because two parties can't come to an agreement on what a designation really means and when to use it.
The wildlife's not coming first anyway.
No, I don't think so. No, nobody's making a decision. I don't think either side in this case made a decision with a conceptual and tangible best, and at least in my mind, a fully, best case scenario in mind for the people on the ground and the animals on the ground and the tribal elements and the Native Americans and all that. It just gets too swept up in party politics and one line against another.
Is one of the reasons that this has been so hotly debated that people are in the States are worried about this being a precedent where other monuments might then be cut down? Is that a concern?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because it sets how a president treats the Antiquities Act and the abuse of the power they have from that act is a huge concern. It doesn't. I mean, obviously here there was a veil. We believe there was a veil of a review. This review was always meant to do one certain thing, and there's been some mining leases signed in and around Bears Ears. There's been some talk of opening some other parts up for leasing, for mining, after the fact. And so it's pretty. I believe it's pretty clear that what's happening here is these designations are being used as political tools to achieve goals. And if it's done in this if there's one overreach made, many others can be made. And it's pretty unique in that the president can not unilaterally make these moves, but almost unilaterally make these moves and change these designations.
We're just gonna have to watch that space.
One man.
It's
Yeah.
Now I understand.
It's tough.
Now I understand why why all our American friends have been so hot under the collar.
Yeah. Well, it's we all know. Like I know specifically that there is something at play here, and hopefully you guys come over and experience it at some point. That we have a model of conservation that worked, specific to how we treat wildlife and wild lands, and it has worked in spades. I mean, we have 640 million acres of places. I'm standing in Bozeman, Montana. I could get in my truck right now and go explore millions of acres in the Gallatin National Forest and Yellowstone National Park and explore those places almost without, encumbrance. So that feeling, waking up in the morning to that feeling, knowing that mountain over there is accessible to you and anyone else, is unique. And there's a lot of, this is just one detail in a larger fight that's been going on ever since the turn of the century when these ideas came to be, is that, there's one side that sees the short-term gain of the extraction of resources and privatization of land, and one side that sees the long-term gain of allowing it to be public. And those things are twisted around a good bit, but that's what it means to me. And not all access is good. Not all access is bad. Like I said, some people see access as cutting roads through wilderness. Other people see access is allowing people in on foot and on foot only. And so there's a lot of nuance in the conversation, but I think for folks like me and everybody you guys know in the States, we're all just fighting to keep the ideals that we've had for a century going in the best way we can. And it's complicated. It
took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to set it up in the States, and it was all originally for the protection of wildlife. So I hope that's never the sight of that is never lost. I think that needs to be the key.
Yeah, I mean, if you very briefly look at Texas, Texas is, I believe, 98% privately owned, and in our model of conservation, we say specifically that wildlife is held in trust by the states, but it is owned by the people, which means that we trust the states to manage this wildlife using science and biology to tell us how many animals we can kill and what keeps a healthy population, and for them to be stewards of the land, but they do not own it. They do not own the wildlife. The people do. And in Texas, where most of the land is private and there are high fences, some of the wildlife is not free to go as it pleases from one place to another. And the privatization of wildlife, while it may be good in small chunks, I don't believe is good for the greater soul of our country and those wildlife populations. So we have one example, and I lived there for 4 years, of a place where there's not much accessible land. There's not much accessible wildlife. You have to know someone or pay a large fee to get a lease to go and hunt. And so I've lived in that reality, and I now live in a reality where I can take my son and go up to the mountain and chase elk. If I have a license that's pretty cheap and a tag to do so, I can roam as I please, and that's a big deal.
It's interesting because we were speaking to Tyler about this when Tyler Sharp, when he was over.
I think we were talking about on the podcast, actually.
Yeah, we think we did talk about it on the podcast. The podcast that got corrupted.
Yeah,
I know you've had a very similar experience.
That podcast.
Oh,
that podcast.
Thank God you had the same problem.
Oh, we did.
God.
Oh, yeah.
After 3, we're going to get on to talking about your podcast actually, but after 3 years of podcasting,
it was the first time it ever happened.
And it was with Tyler,
and it was the best podcast we've ever recorded,
and will ever record.
Well, I can't wait to listen to it.
And it was about 2.5 hours long.
It was a long podcast,
and we clicked.
Oh, wow.
It's not like we hadn't even remembered to press record. We pressed it, and normally you get the little old egg timer that comes up on the audio recording. Nothing. That was it. Didn't exist.
So,
oh boy.
So yeah, we talked about it on
boy.
that podcast, and then Tyler was staying at my house, so later on that night with with a beer and quite a lot of whiskey, we recorded another
Probably
one.
as late as it is now, actually.
Yeah, it probably was as late as it was now. But anyway, in that podcast, which I think was actually the original one that no one will ever get to hear, and I referenced in that podcast with him that we did get recorded, I actually referenced your one, because I think you did, was it with Steve Ranella? That you're...
Yes.
Yeah. And it made me chuckle when you were talking about losing it. And then I guess I deserve what I got.
Yeah, well, at least you guys got to do what I did.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
re-record it.
Yeah.
And then reference back to the never to be listened to podcast.
It was
during
quite
that one.
amusing. Yeah. Anyway,
Well,
in that one, we were explaining to Tyler about our land use here, and the reason I bring this up is because it's quite interesting. You're talking about Texas there and the very large percentage of private ownership, but the inaccessibility, or not without forking out a lot of money. And we have a kind of a reverse here, where we have almost entirely private land, but we have fantastic access in Scotland because although it's private, there is a right to roam. So in terms of walking around, seeing wildlife, there's
Camping, whatever. Yeah.
There's not really any high fences here at all. There are in a few places like round plantations to stop deer eating trees.
But you can climb them if you want,
and you can go through the gates.
Yeah.
So we have mass private land ownership, but really access everywhere for everything apart from hunting. But the hunting access is almost everywhere, but you have to pay for it. But it's not massive sums of money. It's fairly modest amounts. There's nowhere really shut down. You just phone up an estate office and say, "Do you have a spare? I would like to come and hunt a stag this year. Is there spare weeks?" Yeah. So it's strange, and it works really well here. But we're a small island compared to you. So, like you were saying right back at the start, that not all models work in all places. But there's a lot that people can learn from one another. It's an example of something that does work, and I've actually written an article about it for the next issue of Modern Huntsman. But
yeah, I'd like. I can't wait for that issue just because I know, and working with Tyler a little bit on it, that it does touch on some of the perspective there. And,
are you writing it?
And I will say, I was going to. I have a new venture that kept me from doing so, but I had an aim to do that. But I think that. I always, we get so wrapped up in public lands, and it's a neat and tidy narrative here, right? Public lands, it's like American freedom, apple pie, eagles, American freedom, public lands, and that's nice. And it really is something I believe in strongly. But at the same time, private landowners, especially out here in the West, do some of the best wildlife stewardship there is because they have control over their lands and the control over their habitat. And public lands, are expensive to manage, and with, like we were saying earlier, with a lot of people traveling through there, or with these open lands, there can be challenges to manage them. So we have to be not so foolish as to say like everything should be public, nothing should be private. We should understand that both those things, for hunters especially, should be present, and both those things are required. And so I think everyone here knows that, but sometimes when you get caught up like we are in the States right now in a public land, real trendy time, that we should always remember that, public lands and access are good things, but we should be very mindful of how that happens and not getting too far down the keep it public rabbit hole, because it can be dangerous.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it comes down to just understand it, but keep an open mind, and don't be so narrow-minded on like a single tagline. One of the things, and I know that it's something you've discussed before in the hunting space, where we've got to a point where we understand as a community, generally speaking, globally, that we need to make what we do more understandable to the general public. And so by in doing that, we've kind of tagged on to hunting has to be conservation, because that's how we justify it. And we could talk forever about all the great examples of that. You've been talking about the North America model, which is one example that has worked tremendously well, bringing back many, many species from the brink of extinction to flourishing today. And you can look at examples in South Africa and other parts of the world where that holds true. But I've I've said this quite a few times, and we've talked about it on the podcast quite a few times, that kind of line is becoming increasingly disingenuous because people are saying it as a reflex rather than really thinking about it and meaning it. Is that? I know that's something that you've seen as well.
Yeah, for sure. I'm always wary of like the absence of nuance in these conversations, like the absence of the feeling to boil these complicated issues down into taglines and hashtags and things that we say. Because if you really, what I've found with folks that don't hunt, if you run into an intellectually curious person who has never hunted, some of their rather, school-age questions, their innocuous questions, become hard to answer because you've never thought about it that way before. You just like, I'm just going to spit out, well, hunting is conservation. Well, why? Well, because, conservation dollars. They're like, what do you mean? And you get to this lack of knowledge from a non-hunter's point of view turns into this. You can't just spit out to them the party lines because you have to have thought through why you personally are doing things and then why your group is doing things. And then the question that will be important throughout the world, not just my country or yours, is this thing hunting a benefit to our society and to our people and to our animals? That's the question that we're always trying to answer. So if in answering that question we're just spitting out manufactured gibberish, then we're going to lose always, because all it takes is just a few more deeper questions and folks will find that we maybe have not thought it out like we should have.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, the three of us have chosen a profession and a hobby or a lifestyle that includes killing other things, and we're not golfing or swimming or shooting up hoop. We're going out and taking from nature something we didn't put there. So we owe more depth of thought. We owe a lot more than just coming up with a hashtag or some party line that makes us feel real good. We got to do more than that.
I mean, where I've not just in the States, but I've seen it in the UK too. Even major organizations fairly guilty of it, where not really putting much substance behind the statements and almost relying on the fact that the people who are members must be doing something, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Hunting's all good. Always.
Well, I mean, I think at some level conservation is also marketing. Most of the conservation groups are trying to attract members to their group.
Very true.
And so in attracting members to groups in any whether it's conservation or really any form of organization at all, is you're trying to simplify the message so someone can take it up and give you a little bit of money. That's what they're trying to do, and there's folks in each one of these organizations in our country that are there to market a message. And the more complicated that message, the more time it takes for somebody to invest in it, the less you're likely going to get membership growth. And these things become businesses. They're not for profit, but they're businesses all the same. And so it's complicated. And what that means is that folks that are members of these organizations have to call upon the organization to be better, and not just to market, and not just to come up with catchy photo contests and give away products and have awesome little hashtags and beer nights, and do more than that, because that's not what we're here to do. We're here to do more than that. So yeah, I think it's on us to call for these organizations to do more and not accept hunting as conservation or keep it public as our as the center point of the conversation, because that's not it.
It has to be more than words.
Yeah, and I think it is.
And I think I was just going to say that I think there are some good examples, and there are a lot of people doing great, even if it's just informational, even if it's just conversations like we're having, so that people can think in a little bit more depth. It is happening. I genuinely believe that in the last couple of years we've seen the rise of a wave of change. You look at podcasts like your podcast, The Hunting Collective, Obviously, Steve, Ranella, and those guys have been on the go for a long time, but you see how that's becoming a bit more mainstream. It's on Netflix. People are listening to or the millions of people that listen to Joe Rogan, and you're on his show. So is Steve. You've got Modern Huntsman out, which is a kind of a new wave of hunting being really thought about at the granular level, back to basics. What does it and what should it mean?
Yeah, I think, I always thought about that as this reaction to a problem, like this pushed in a corner feeling. I think my generation, I'm 32, my generation in the States here is different than the generation that came before us, because we're now have to answer the question, why do you hunt? And we're the first generation to openly have to answer that question, and do it all the time, do it every day. Every time you kill an animal, you have to answer that question to yourself and to the people around you and to the people that you interact with. And my father's generation almost never had to answer that question.
No justification needed.
Yeah, it's
not
like hunting's part of our culture.
Publicly,
Yeah, not publicly, because social media didn't exist, one, and two, it was a part of the culture in a lot of rural parts of America and suburban parts of America. And, we're in a position now where everybody can see everything, and we all have the opportunity to tell our story. And I feel the obligation to tell our story. And so, we're just living in a different time. And so I think my generation has kind of been pushed up against the wall and has to react, has to punch out a little bit of some of the more negative stereotypes that were allowed to go on. And so, I think Steve's involvement in hunting and mine and Joe Rogan's and you guys and everybody that are thinking a little bit deeper, Tyler Sharp and Charles Post, and I think it's a reaction. It's a cure to an ill, if I could say it that way. I believe that everybody started to see, oh my gosh, our society is changing and becoming more urban, and we're getting regulated to the sidelines because no one has been able to articulate this in a way that everyone can understand. And so,
yeah, we've been bad at that historically.
Yeah, we have been bad at that, and but I don't blame anyone for being bad at that, because our world has changed so rapidly. We've just now found ourselves with a platform to tell our story, and really no history of telling it other than talking amongst ourselves on outdoor TV or outdoor publications and things like that. So we're just in that transition. We're in the middle of it, and to recognize that transition is, I think, the first step.
Do you know what is interesting though? Is you look at America, UK, places in Europe, we're all facing the same problems. All of them are facing problems very similar, be it land or regulation of hunting or firearms or all these things. All of these countries spread across the planet are all facing very similar issues.
Yeah, that's what I've always tried to find, like those little threads that you can pull on, and I think that as our world progresses, it's moving away from what we do. It's precipitously moving away from all the things we're talking about. It's getting more comfortable. It's
becoming more urban.
Becoming more urban, more technical, more comfortable, more soft. Way more connected and less disconnected. And so I think we're just going through that transition and learning how to communicate with each other in this new time. I do think, though, and I think that's where you guys have found success and guys like Ranella have found success, is that it's creating this void of people that are living in the suburbs, living in urban environments, that thirst for the things that we're talking about, that realize that there's this like rugged individualism that they're missing out on because of where they live and the generation that they're being brought up in. So I think we can capitalize on that. Not that we we need to treat it like we're capitalizing on it, but we're just recognizing that will happen. People will thirst to get outside and challenge themselves. And if we're out there explaining what we do and why we do it, and they somehow connect to us and then go down their own path of hunting, then we'll have a whole new generation of hunters that learned a different way. And that's what I hope that we're doing.
Yeah, I'm sure your experience will be similar to ours here, but we always find that when you have the discussions with people who are just fairly open-minded and have no particular opinion one way or the other, that they do want to understand that kind of way of life,
People are
which
curious.
is more simple, more stripped back, a little bit more primitive, because most people do realize that we all came from that at some point, and this is a little part of our past that we're holding on to, and there's done right, there's nothing wrong with it, and if anything, and it's something that started here, but I know it didn't start here, it's starting here, but started more in the States, is that the locavore movement, where people want to have locally sourced meat. That is carrying through to the hunting fields, where people who wouldn't traditionally have been seen as a hunter want to understand that way of life, because they want to know where their food has come from. And a lot of it, we can have the discussions about trophy hunting, if we want to call it that, and the reasons why people do it. But for the average man on the street who is not fussed one way or the other, they understand that.
Yeah, they do. And I think the trophy hunting thing now, as the trophy hunting thing goes forward, it's just like same. We have the same in our gun culture. There's like this large reactionary piece that serves only to distract us. Like every time some young lady shoots a lion, sometimes this last time it happened, I can't remember the young lady's name, but she shot a lion, and a year later there was an outrage. Celebrities were upset. A year later. And so I looked at that, and I looked really hard at it, and I wanted to write a bunch of like, oh, here's why this was good, or here's why this makes sense. And I thought, fuck that. Like, that's just a distraction that somebody put together to anger people and move them for a cause, or move them to action for animal rights. And that's just, for me, anybody that would listen to that probably won't listen to me.
Our media really likes it if it's an American that does it.
Yeah,
an American woman,
we love it.
an American woman. That is the ultimate for our media over here. If they catch someone doing something like that,
even if it was like 4 years ago,
we found the photo. We don't give a shit. It doesn't even matter if they pulled the trigger, if they're behind it.
Yeah, it's such a sad value of life situation, because we get it here in the States too with guns. If there's a mass shooting that is performed using the guns that we don't like, that we want to ban, it's a big deal. And if there's a mass shooting using the guns that we feel like we're okay with and aren't so dangerous, it's not as big a deal. It's the same way with hunting. If a young American blonde with cleavage and a nice rifle shoots a lion, hunters are terrible. If that's not happening, no one cares on those levels. So I think there's this mass distractionary culture that only serves to steer us away from our important conversations for moments, to get angry and fight. And so I'm not going to fight that anymore, because there's no part of that conversation that really matters.
So have you tried to remove yourself away from getting involved in those kind of debates online, or is that something you've never really done?
I've done it, man. If you can search my name and articles I've written in the past, I wrote articles on rhino hunting when Corey Knowlton did it. I wrote an article on Melissa Bachman when she did it. I was deep into that, and I remember being in the comment threads on the articles that I wrote and just having these arguments and thinking I could solve it, and spending a lot of time and energy doing that. And I've since realized that is part of our culture that seeks to anger me and distract me from the thing that I do, which isn't killing lions at all. I don't want to kill a lion. But I'm a hunter, and so the best I can do with that is at this point ignore it, because it's just replaying the same narrative over and over and over again. Both sides do it to achieve goals, to get people emotional and get them to act. And I find that with my podcast, and I'm sure with yours, if you just continue to tell your story from your perspective and uncover, truths that are around you, that people will, be more engaged in that in the long term, rather than just sensationalize stuff and get them commenting.
Definitely. We've certainly found that this kind of long-form discussion, where we can dig into topics and explain and articulate yourself with a bit of time. The amount of emails that we get from non-hunters who have come onto the show who have taken the time, and these are just the ones who have taken the time to actually write an email to say they understand something better, or they're more open-minded to it now because of a particular guest. It's very often because of a particular guest that you've had on. Is amazing, and whenever I get something like that in my inbox, it gives me hope. It gives me a lot of hope that, bit by bit, as everybody's playing their part, whether it's a conversation in a supermarket, around a dinner table, it's someone listening to your podcast, our podcast, bit by bit, it is, if when done right, with the right honesty about what we do as hunters, people can change their mind, or if at least not change their mind, not be objective, not object to it.
The bottom line, people, they're not stupid, and they want to find out the information. On the whole, people aren't stupid. There are some very stupid people out there, but on the whole, people are not. And if the information is given to them and they can access it, people can generally tell if someone's giving them a bullshit story or not. And especially over a podcast or something like that, you can tell the people.
You can only bullshit for so long.
Yeah, there is, and you get caught out eventually with the questions. So
I could give you a couple hours of bullshit.
You've done a good job so far, then.
I'm good at that. No, I agree with that. I find myself very happy to have found hunting in the way that I found it, and very happy to have had it enrich my life the way it has. And if I didn't have that starting point, I don't know where I would be in life. I think about that daily, and I think that's what amazes me, that when I try to just kind of churn up that enriching, happy feeling and put it out my best way I know how, and you get an email like you guys likely get that's 6 pages long, that's telling someone's entire life story and the effect you've had on that and what it means to them going forward, and you've relayed a little bit of your experience and their feeling the thing that you feel when you wake up. That's cool, and that's all I'd ever want to do. And when people say, how many downloads you get, I do look at that, I'm not going to lie, but I don't live and die by it. I live and die by those emails and those messages on Instagram and those people that stop me and say, hey man, I really love what you're doing. And I think we live in a great time where people can distract us with disenfranchising, angry messages about lines, but we also live in a great time where you can have a conversation like this with many thousands or hundreds of thousands of people and hopefully impart what you know to them in the best way you can. So, it's two sides of the coin, and I think for the hunting world, if we just focus on the positive side of the coin and stay there and continue to talk, we have the right message. We have a very powerful thing that we do on a lot of levels. So we just need to ride that out and stop being so distracted by some of the things people would have us debate about.
Talking of podcasting, you in the podcasting space, it feels like you've kind of been there forever, but you haven't, because the Hunting Collective is fairly new, but you've had some incredible guests. And I have to say, for podcasts arriving on the scene, day one, podcast one, I think you nailed pretty much everything about spot on. The logo, the look, the feel.
I love the graphics, by the way. They're really cool.
Graphics are great. But I'm trying to work out whether we should start talking about that before getting a bit of backstory of yourself. I feel like we should rewind time a bit.
Rewind,
so we're going to talk about the podcast, the Hunting Collective, but give me a bit of your backstory, because I think although quite a few of our listeners will have probably heard your name, they probably follow you on Instagram, may very well listen to your podcast because we plugged it quite a few times, but probably don't know that you were an editor of a magazine, if we go back to that point in your life. How did that come about, and what was... that must have been pretty formative in terms of how the people that you met, that network, how you formed your ideas moving forward to Yeti and, what you're doing now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think... I was always wanted to be a writer as a youngster, and I always wanted to be a journalist. I kind of always saw myself as that, and pretty quickly in my career, I found myself right out of college working for American Hunter magazine at the NRA, so at the NRA headquarters every day, working as a digital editor for American Hunter magazine, and realizing that a guy could be in an industry where he could hunt, write about it, and people would read it. And I remember,
and you'd get paid,
and somebody would pay me. And I
Crazy.
thought, well, they'll shut this down pretty quick. They'll realize I'm having a great. They'll realize I'm having a great time, and they'll just quit paying me. So I remember my first thought was like, I went on an antelope hunt out west in Wyoming when I was maybe 23 for my first industry trip, and I realized that was a reality. And man, it seems like so long ago. It was only 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and pretty quickly realized that this was like this intersection of all the things that I wanted to do: writing, journalism, hunting. This intersection in a great way where I could have my own experiences and convey those experiences. And unlike maybe a sports writer, which I thought maybe I wanted to be at some point, I didn't have to write about someone else's experiences and rely only on that form of communication. And so I figured that out pretty quick, and then I got recruited to go be a part of Peterson's Hunting magazine after about 3 years at the NRA, in which time I got to do some amazing hunting things. And that only continued as I went to Peterson's and ran their digital operation for a long time as an editor, and then went on to be executive editor of the magazine, working under Mike Scobie, and putting together the day-to-day
Mike's a fun
magazine.
guy.
Oh, yeah, you won't forget Mike. Hang out with him. Can you imagine hanging out with Mike Scobie for like every day for years?
Well,
you can imagine the stories I have.
Just as I can only fathom, just as a very brief side note to your history, Mike was here last year hunting in the Highlands on an event that we were filming for Rigby. And he went out with Daryl and someone else that day to go stalking. And he went stalking in a tuxedo and a kilt.
On a kilt, yeah.
Yep.
We try to tell him that, we typically don't really do that kind of thing here, but there's a reason I came back from hunt last week and I was covered in ticks on my legs and I was wearing trousers. You can imagine what it's like when you've got just a kilt.
Yes, well, he's a man that likes to let it fly.
Yeah. Sorry, so carry on, Ben. So that's the anecdote to Mike Scobie.
Yes. What was I talking about? Now I'm thinking about Mike Scobie in a kilt. I can't even remember what I was talking about. Something certainly important. Mike hired me into that, and I was able to do a lot of really cool stuff. I mean, I traveled to Bulgaria as a writer. I traveled to the Dominican Republic, traveled all over the West, to Canada, pretty much every province in Canada. As a writer, and just writing about my experiences making relationships in the hunting world, and quickly realizing like I'm 26, 27 years old, and I feel like I'm maybe at the pinnacle. I'm not really sure if this could get any better than what I'm doing now, because my last fall, it would have been about 5 years ago, my last fall at Peterson's as one of the editors, I did a cover shoot with Joe Rogan and met him and went moose hunting in British Columbia. I shot, I think, 2 elk and a mule deer, hunted all over the West.
It was an epic cover shoot, that, by the way. I know exactly the picture you're talking about. I love that.
Yeah, and that was a deal where it was kind of my brainchild, and we went up there on this hunt, and I had this other idea about what the cover shoot would be, and we ended up doing that shot as a last-minute deal, and then when we saw it on the page, we're like, oh my gosh, that may be the best. For all that it is, the best cover that I've ever seen or been a part of.
I love it. Just to describe it to people, there's Joe Rogan looking nails and just how Joe Rogan looks, with a big slab, what was it, a haunch of elk? Or what was it?
I think he shared it recently, actually.
A moose.
He shared it again fairly recently.
Yeah. It's just such a cool picture. And I really wish that an editor here in the UK would have the balls to put something like that, because there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
and I wish someone would have. And I've sent pictures. I'm not sure if I'd seen that picture at the time. I probably had. And there was a great picture that I had of a hunt in Sweden, and it was a friend of mine holding the heart of a moose, of a huge moose, in his hands after the hunt, and it kind of had a similar feel. And I really wish that had made the front cover, because there was a great story there, and people could have dug into it off the front cover. But I've never ever seen in this country a front cover with a slab of meat on someone's shoulder in that kind of hunting context.
Yeah. I mean, I think we did a cover the year before that. We called it the Meat Eater edition, where it was just a bloody hand and a knife and a piece of backstrap.
Another one, yeah.
Cover on white. And when we did that, we got feedback from some of the top media critics that this is like, oh, it's very brave, and we thought highly of that, and so we decided, well, this kind of messaging has to resonate, because it's a huge part of what we do, but it's so glossed over, and we got a lot of negative feedback, like, why don't you just put a cooked venison steak on the cover with some carrots and vegetables and make it look really nice? And we said, because that's not real.
Yeah.
Like, it's one part of the journey, but there's a huge touch point.
It's the end.
When you do like 10 to 12 covers a year and they all have big antlered animals on them, you start to realize, like, we're focusing on one particular part of the experience here. Maybe. I didn't feel like it was very revolutionary at the time. I just said, like, maybe we'll focus on a different part of it. And because hunting is such a traditional pursuit here, anything that, radically goes against showing big antlers and wide open spaces on a cover, like in a magazine like Peterson's, seems to be revolutionary, where it really is just a depiction of what we go through at some level. And so, yeah, that was, and that's a good segue to when I was on that hunt with Joe. Joe and I had never met in person before. We spent 6 days hunting moose together and had a great time. It was a hunt of my life. I mean, I can remember forgetting to look for moose because we were laughing so hard, and like him just like slinging jokes, and I just couldn't breathe for like hours on it. And we hit it off really, really well. And the photographer Sam Soholt was the first time I'd met him, and him and I are great friends now and have done a lot of adventuring together. And I just remember the truck being full of just like, this is the best crew we've ever had, and it was just so much fun. And about halfway through the hunt, Joe started saying, "You should podcast, man. You're a funny dude. You should podcast." And I remember thinking, man, I'm an editor of a magazine, dude. What's a podcast? Podcast is nothing. That's like just fellas in their basement talking into a microphone.
in their mom's basement.
Yeah, their mom's basement. And if only I would have freaking listened to Joe Rogan 5 years ago, I would have been well further down the line.
And you'd have 30 million people downloading every week.
Yeah, I'm sure. Of course, that would be. Yep, exactly. But he was, his podcast was just then starting to get, some traction. And by traction, I mean like a couple million downloads per
just
episode or whatever, which is just a few. And so I remember talking to Sam when we were bunking together, like, dude, I'm starting a podcast. I'm going to do it. I told my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, I'm going to do it. And then I went back to editor life, and I got an offer at Yeti, and I didn't. I just never followed through with this idea to do a podcast. And in some ways, I'm that upsets me to think about, but other ways I don't know that I've been prepared enough and have thought through some of the things I know now enough to have a podcast. So it was entertaining back then, so it was probably a good thing. But then after that fall, I got offered a job at Yeti. At that point, it was a fairly upstart company, and they were a hunting, fishing, cooler company, and wanted somebody to run their hunting operations and be, kind of the face of their operation in the hunting world, and connect with all their ambassadors and all their influencers and be a part of the space and kind of be that go-between between the hunting world and their company. And so
at that point in the Yeti history, that must have been very exciting. Knowing where they are now and how rapid that must have been, that must have been something else.
It was in leaving there, which I did recently, I reflected on that a lot, and I remember thinking, when I got there, that this doesn't seem real. It's this Austin, Texas is this ultra cool town with a lot of famous people hanging around, a lot of music, a lot of entertainment, a lot of great food, and then you plunk this cool upstart product company with a lot of growth and a lot of excitement and a lot of cool people, and we just let it fly for about 2 years. and we had this grand honeymoon where we could pretty much do whatever we wanted, and it all worked, and we were able to do things that I don't think anybody would ever have conceived of as far as from the company standpoint, but then on a personal level. And we had fun doing it, and a lot of good people evolved along the way, and it was kind of a whirlwind that when I look back on it, I'm like, man, I wish I would have appreciated that while it was happening. But we were just having too much fun and really, living the life that the company started to extol and talk about, hunting all over the world and talking about our coolers and taking them places where no one else would go, and really living the thing that we were preaching. And so it was a great time, and it was a time that kind of shaped me more than I'll ever probably give it credit for. But I'm happy about that. I look back on that time at Yeti, and I would say it was formative for me in the hunting space, getting to meet a lot of my idols, getting to expand my universe in that way, and hunt, with more than just Joe Rogan and people like Steve Rinella and people like Cam Haines, and get to know people like John Dudley and Remy Warren, and these people that, as I came to find by knowing them, personally, were so much better at hunting than me. It's so much better, and gave me so much more perspective of what I needed to do and my place in hunting. And so it really set it up for me to know more about what I wanted to do.
All those names that you've mentioned, I'd say, have all been also at the forefront of kind of rewriting this new narrative that we are telling here on this podcast, on your podcast. In writings, all of those names have definitely been responsible for helping to carry people through.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. And there's something in that's valuable. And we did my last really Yeti hunt that I was able to organize was with all those guys, with Adam Greentree, with Joe Rogan, with John Dudley, and Remy and myself and Sam Soholt. And I knew I was leaving at that point, and I just wanted to do my best to get these people together and tell them personally, but also let the hunting world see, one, that they're great people, and two, they all care, and they all, in my eyes, are deserving of of the attention they've gotten, and have done well by getting that attention. So that was, I'll never be able to repay Yeti or the people that worked at Yeti for the chance to represent hunting in the way that I got to represent it, and call attention to those people that I felt like deserved the attention.
We've always said, over the last couple of years, as we've formed our company, our filmmaking business, and started to look at what there was out there, that the Yeti storytelling and films are some of the best out there. And you were at the reins when a lot of that was going on. But at the time,
I can't say the reins.
Well, you were there.
I was there. I was in the room.
You were playing a serious part. You were Ben O'Brien, Mr. Yeti.
I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
And apart from Sitka, I can't think of any other organization, company, TV channel, with the exception of, but it's a very different type of thing. The Meat Eater series is a very different type of filmmaking. We're doing anything like that kind of super high-end production, great stories. Yeah. Where did that momentum come from? Because at the time it must have been quite a bold move, because doing that's not inexpensive.
No, yeah, you're right. You're thinking right on that one. I think it came from, our VP of marketing at the time was Corey Maynard, and Corey Maynard had come from Gerber and kind of worked on the Hello Trouble campaign and some different things there at Gerber. Not the baby food, the knives, of course. And there's some jokes in there. We'll keep it serious. Here's a guy that had this idea to be storytellers. I mean, he was looking at Red Bull and looking at Patagonia, and look at these companies that were able to tell stories first and do so in a way that kind of spoke to not their product, but why they existed in the first place. And when I went to interview there, that's pretty much what they said to me. And I was like, well, marketing's the enemy of journalism, so I don't want to be a marketer. But the way that they pitched that position to me was very much, hey, we're going to be storytellers and want to tell that story. And the first time we did that, the first film that we did was about a rafting trip down the Grand Canyon, and one of the head guides, I can't remember the name of the film, it escapes me, I'll think of it. It was the first film that we did. And it wasn't a hunting film. It was very much just about people and relationships and this place. And we went and filmed it. And folks came back, and I remember sitting in a conference room at Yeti and watching this film and thinking, we're onto something here. I remember looking at Corey and being like, this is amazing, man. We got to do more of these. And he was already well ahead of me on that. And so there was a great leap of faith to spend the money. It's no small chunk of change to do these films, to really have a tangible way to talk to the people that we knew wanted to hear from us and the people we wanted to talk to. And there's real fancy marketing terms for that, but it was really just like, who is the guy we care about? Who do we idolize, and who idolizes our product? And let's go find and tell those stories. And it was a fun time. We did, I don't know how many Yeti films we did in my time there, but it felt like every one that came out got better and better and better.
They did, yeah.
And they would be on these very disparate subject matters. Like, oh, we're doing a kayak race in South Texas. Oh, we're doing a ranch, a cowboy, a working cow ranch in Hawaii. Oh, we're doing a hunt in Nepal. Oh, yeah. We're doing a duck hunter in Missouri. I mean, there's just all these disparate stories that felt connected, and that's what we wanted to do. We wanted, at the end of the day, we wanted all these people that shared values and didn't know it to have Yeti in common. And I think
it worked.
Hopefully we
achieved
100%. It. Yeah, hopefully we achieved it.
Well, funny enough, the first time that we spoke, which was just a weird quirk of fate, was when you were still at Yeti, and I asked you, I got contact details for you, and asked if we could show Arctic Red at our film festival. And that, along with the Carter Andrews short that you did, are probably my two favorite Yeti films, I think.
Yeah. There's a list of them. I in my leaving, and even doing my podcast now, I feel like drawn to the characters that we covered in those films. Whether I was part of every film or not, I just was drawn to those people and the way those stories were told. And at the end of the day, for me, that's what it's about. It's like there's this story. Everybody's got a story, and the more stories you hear and the more you get to take in, the more you become a little more worldly, a little better of a person for having heard it. And there's a lot of, that Arctic Red, I think, was the first one in the hunting space that we did that I really felt hit the right notes.
That was beautiful.
I felt like it was beautiful. It was, reverent. It was
the message was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean the quote in there from Tavis about reading a book every chapter at a time.
Yeah.
When I heard that the first time, I was like, "Oh my God, this guy's a genius!" and all props to Mark Seacat and his crew at Seacat Creative, who really, these are the guys who do all the work. We just sit back and take it in and adjust it a little bit and put it out to the public. But that was the first time I really felt like we had achieved something in the hunting space. But by that time, I really wasn't concerned just with the hunting space. I just knew that this message was important for everybody that liked to go outside and, like grit and like personality and like soul and just, like a good story.
As you rightly say, a lot of the cinema comes down to the skill and the vision of the directors and the production company that are there. But the fact that the team at Yeti were responsible for coughing up the money and pushing it forward and say, we need to do this, let's create these ideas, I think really pulled forward the type and level of filming in the hunting and outdoor space, over the last 3 or 4 years. I'm pretty confident that what Yeti were putting out during that period and are still is responsible for this kind of lift.
It's also
in the messaging.
It's also crazy how like amazing the films are, and you're selling coolers. That's the bottom line of it.
There is that too.
That is the bottom line.
You guys like plastic boxes, huh? Yeah. Let's go. They're pretty expensive. Yeah, that's like once you get in that environment, I would give all shout out for those films to Corey Maynard, who I mentioned. There's a guy named Scott Ballou that is the producer of those films back at Yeti, and those guys were really the masterminds behind a lot of it. And it really was when you're working on that stuff and your job is a marketer for a cooler company, you forget that you're a marketer for a cooler company for a time. You're just thinking about that story and you're thinking about that person.
You're selling life.
Thinking about yeah, man. And you're not, we never, in creating those films, anyone that I was ever involved in, we never sat and thought, how many coolers were we going to sell because of this film? And we never thought how much traffic do we need to get? We never thought how many conversions do we need to get? We just thought we need to make a good film here and move people. And if they're moved, they'll feel what we feel and they'll be drawn to our product if it works, for them and the lifestyle works for them.
And it certainly did.
Yeah.
From Yeti. No, you were still at Yeti when you started your podcast. So we've been talking for the last 30 minutes to get back to where we started, which was the podcast.
Yeah.
And the Hunting Collective was born. So even though there was a 5-year gap from Joe saying, "Hey man, you got to do a podcast," what was eventually the catalyst that made you think, "Okay, now I need to do it"?
Yeah, I've probably just the power of that. Some of the storytelling I saw at Yeti kind of put it in perspective. But I also was like finally had a lot of my ideas about hunting, codified in my own mind. Because I was only 30, 31, 32, and in the years prior to that, I find myself like thinking one thing one day and something the next, and you search in those years to find a direction. Yeah, you're learning, right? And so, like I said, I'm happy that I didn't do a podcast when Joe suggested, although it would have been fine to learn in audio form and have people learn with me. That'd have been fine. But I think I was just ready to, like, I finally felt like I had a voice and I was ready to talk. And I was also, having been in, for a decade in the media landscape, I really just wanted something where I could, like, a cathartic release where I could
therapy for you.
Yeah, where I can kind of just, I like to talk, as you well can see for this podcast, but like, just talk about some of the things I was feeling and some of the things like I was running into, and also just record these awesome. And I also felt like, hey, I'm hunting. Oh, this next month I'm going to go on a hunt with Remy Warren and Shane Dorian, and the next month I'm going to go on a hunt with the Eastmans, and the next. Well, why? Like, I'm missing something if I don't record these experiences for myself, for my son, for people that want to listen to them. And so it was kind of like something I knew I always would lean towards. But, I started listening to Cody Rich's podcast, to be honest, and listened to his thing. And I was on it and then listened to it a bunch afterwards and started thinking, this is pretty cool. This guy kind of feels like a journalist, and he's not just talking about himself the whole time. And I think that's what drove me to, and Joe Rogan's too, of course, but drove me to think, like, as a journalist, I could have a podcast and it doesn't have to be just about me.
No. Genuinely, it's for me in the hunting space. Well, for both of us, Daryl just wrote our top 8 recommended podcasts in hunting.
I did it last year as well, and it's changed a bit from last year, but
it's right up there.
Yours is up there.
I don't miss one. I thoroughly enjoy it.
I kept Joe's in the same place because I still enjoy his podcast, but what I like about Joe Rogan's is he is one of 2 podcasts in the world that they actually exclude his podcast from any stats that they give out for podcasting world.
Many people
because it skews all of the numbers.
It's that big.
It's that big.
He's the outlier.
Yeah, he is.
Yep.
He's the alpha when it comes to podcasting, for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, he has spawned so many podcasts from his.
Yeah.
I mean, I bet it's in the hundreds of people that he's had on. He's been like, "You should do podcasts, man." He's such a good person. Like, he just wants other people to succeed and do good things. So I think he's spawned not only hunting podcasts like Ranella's and mine and others, but and I think he's just kind of created this podcast is a good thing. Go do one, man. It's not that hard. That's what he told me.
Well, I think to this point, certainly, I think you've done an awesome job as getting into it from day one. As I said at the very start, the standard and everything has been so great, and you have some awesome guests on there, and really digging deep on some fascinating topics. So, if any of our listeners haven't tuned in, Hunting Collective, go give it a click.
Yeah, click it. Yeah, click it.
Click it. Subscribe.
Subscribe. I appreciate that. It's been like I said, I just live for that, like the feedback you just gave, or somebody sharing their hunting story or asking a question, or that's how I just kind of live for that. I don't really. I
love the fact that when you hear, especially the conversations with people that you clearly know very well on your podcast, is that I can hear you trying to understand and rationalize stuff in your own mind in the conversations. And I really like that, because it has that very honest feel where it is a conversation that goes back to and fro, and you're kind of molding. Yes, you have an opinion, the other person has an opinion, but you're kind of molding what the outcome of that is because of the debate that you're having, and I think that's great.
Yeah. I always I don't script them. I don't really. If I don't know the person, which I'm sure that as I get into higher numbers in the podcast run, I'll have to interview some people I don't know over the time. But in the very short term, that's what I wanted to do. It's just like I'm sure you guys have the same way. You have these conversations with people that you find amazing. Even if you can't tell them that in the moment, you can't be like, "Hey, man, have another beer. You're an amazing person." It would get awkward after a while.
Yeah.
But I think you can do that. And what I've tried to do is not do that as much in the conversation, but then tell that person, after the fact when I record my intro and outro, try to just, because I know that hopefully that person would listen back, but try to, after the fact, record an intro and outro that just tells that person specifically what I think of them and how special they are.
The pressure's on now when we record the intro and outro.
Ben is a wonderful.
We're really stuck for a guest this week, so we thought we'd get Ben O'Brien.
Yeah. He was active on Instagram, so we sent him a message.
What we like to do is have marginal guests on to make ourselves look better. Like marginal looks, marginal talents. Oh, that's where I like to live. But yeah, that's a sappy thing to say, but that's really sometimes how I feel. Especially I've had a few in the last couple where Wyman Menzer or somebody like Omar Avila, where these people, I feel a little bit awkward really communicating to them what they mean to me face to face.
Yeah.
And so I try to encapsulate that, in the beginning and the end, and then let the conversation be what it is in the middle.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. People always ask us this if they're coming on, even if we know them. Oh, can you send me the questions? So no. That ain't how this works.
You're not getting any questions.
You're not getting any questions.
Because I'm not writing any questions.
Because you end up with a much more free-flowing conversation if you can... Yeah, some kind of preconceived idea. I had to know that you used to work for Yeti, so I suppose you have an idea in your mind. You're going to talk about that as a topic.
But there's no,
how old is your? Do you have a dog?
Yeah, do you have a dog? Yeah.
It would be awkward to be like, "Who are you?" What? That's
my
first question: is who are you? What do you do?
Please explain.
And I think we learned very early on when we started. We're coming on our fourth year now.
Three and a bit.
Yeah, fourth at the end of the year, fourth year of it, and we were the first in the UK, and so we had no basis to go on other than the big shows that were in America, so we had a very steep learning curve very quickly, and hopefully we've caught up now.
Oh, you guys are doing great. I will say that I've got 7 I listen to, and you guys are in that 7 for sure. And I don't have a lot of I find myself I don't have a lot of time. But then when you love doing something, I'll get up in the morning, flip on a podcast, listen to it while I'm getting ready for work. Listen to it in the shower.
Yeah,
shut it off.
Time.
Yeah, shut it off to say bye to my wife and son, then turn it back on. Shut it off to talk to my boss, then turn it back on. You find time to listen to that stuff, and it's a cool medium. I find
it is.
Well,
I'm
cool.
honored I'm honored that we're in your list of 7. You're certainly in our list. But it's interesting you say 7 because I was just reading you were showing me something the other day.
We were looking at stats, but it correlates with mine as well because I've got 8 that I subscribe to.
Maybe 6 or 8. I haven't counted.
Yeah, it was the stats. The average person subscribes to 7 podcasts.
Well, damn. Yeah. Like I said, I like to be average. That's my aim.
Bang in the middle.
Stay right in the middle.
So, what can you tell us about what you're doing now? So, you've left Yeti. The podcast is ongoing. What does the world look like for Ben O'Brien, and what can we expect to see you in and doing?
Yeah, I wish I could really
you can't.
give you the full. I can't. Well, I guess maybe that makes it more exciting.
Yeah,
I suppose maybe more annoying. I'm not sure which. I'm starting a new media venture with some other folks in the industry. I can't say who just yet. Maybe next week. I was talking to them about what I could say, and they're like,
they said nothing.
Yeah, they were like, hey, they were like, say nothing. We'll hunt you down. We are hunters.
It's a good job. That's not how we started the podcast. Otherwise, it would have been very short.
What can you tell us? Nothing. All right. Okay.
Nothing. No, it's a new media venture. It's based in Bozeman, and it's going to be podcasts. It's going to be, really, it's going to be kind of a culmination of a lot of stuff we talked about. It's a group of people that all came together to start a new venture because we all kind of think the same way.
Exciting.
We all, and all the names you guys will know, of course, and makes it even more exciting and secretive. But yeah, I mean, it's just folks I've known for a long time, and we all share an ideal and we share a goal, and it was a really good chance for me to dive back into media and dive back into content creation and take my podcast along with me and do it on a more professional level.
Awesome. Hey, that's exciting.
They have the London Podcast Festival, and I think there needs to be like the Bozeman Podcast Festival where we go over and basically it's a week of just podcasters from all over the world in London.
Ben, make it happen. And I believe you can do
this.
But
there's never been a collective of all of the outdoor space podcasters in one space, like podcasting for a whole week, giving shows or anything, because they do it in London and it's sold out for the whole week in London.
We've just created something tonight. We
created something. See, this is how things are created.
At 2:15 in the morning in Scotland, we've just created
call it the hunting.
Yeah.
We could call it the Hunting Collective. That title.
Yeah, it's a good title. Yeah.
That's a great title, I find. Yeah, man. We could do that easy here, as you well know about Bozeman. We could just kind of like look around the corner. There'd be 8 podcasters standing there at the bar.
Come
over here. Yeah, all queued up with their headphones on. But yeah, I mean, I hope that we can do that because I love, like I said, there's guys that podcast right now and live in Bozeman that I like. Let's go hang out and drink a beer and podcast. And every time I'm done, I'm like, I thought the conversation might get stale. It doesn't get stale.
Nah.
And I get like some weird high off just a good conversation like this one. You exchanging ideas and when people are going to hear it later on. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll get weird around that later. But right now, it's nice. It's good energy. It energizes me for the rest of the day, or you guys for the rest of the morning there as it rolls, as the sun comes up in a couple hours.
I'm going fishing in like 5 hours.
The sun will be coming up in a matter of hours.
But Ben, it has been awesome to speak to you in person. I'm hoping that, kind of in person, but I'm hoping that very soon we'll actually get to meet in person, probably in Bozeman, because we are going to plan to come over there at some point fairly soon.
Come for the we'll be the guys Hunting Collective Podcast Festival.
Yeah,
we'll have headsets on at the bar.
We'll just walk around with headsets on.
Yeah, the Scottish guys with headsets. Those guys, I know them. Yeah, we're friends.
If people want to find you on Instagram, you're Benny OB
301. I wish I would have known people would call that out when I made it, but I didn't. So I'm Benny OB 301.
You know that I'm not saying you need to change it, but you can change it.
Oh, you can?
Well, genuinely you can. Yeah, with no effect to your account whatsoever, because we changed ours like 2-3 years ago to just like tidy it up a little bit. And
yeah, I should probably tidy that up. That was like a high school nickname when I was
Ben
partying.
O'Brien might be fine.
But to be
You think
fair,
Ben O'Brien?
but to be fair, when you type on Instagram Ben O'Brien, it comes up.
It does come up.
So it actually doesn't make
up?
any odds. Yeah, it comes up.
Let's not be superficial. We're sticking with it, people.
Yeah,
We're going Benny OB. Come see me at Benny OB 301. Be all kinds of stuff there.
And I imagine that when you can release what you're going to be doing, people will be able to see it there, will they?
Oh, of course. Yeah, we'll announce it there and a bunch of other media outlets. I find it hard to believe you won't, folks that listen to this podcast and maybe listen to mine, won't hear about it some other way. So we're planning a PR blitz right now to kind of get it out there in the world and let people know what we're going to attempt to do. And it should be within the next couple of weeks or months.
We'll be sure to let everybody know as soon as we know.
Well, I appreciate it.
Or I should say, as soon as we can let people know what we know.
Well, you'll be the first to know. And we were actually, when you guys were messaging earlier today, we were in a meeting about that exact thing, and I was wondering if this would be the first place I could talk about it. But no,
close, but no cigar.
It's too close. I know. Now I'm just teasing, but it's exciting. I'm excited to be in Bozeman. Bozeman's a fine place.
Cool. Well, it's been great. Thanks a lot, Ben, and I look forward to listening to your next podcast.
You guys too.
All right, man. Take it easy.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can listen on most of the podcasting platforms, be it Spotify, which is the big one now, iTunes, Stitcher, I actually can't remember all of them, Podbean, Podcast Addict.
iHeartRadio.
Yeah, iHeartRadio. Just type
Did you
it in.
mention Spotify?
Yeah, Spotify was the first one I mentioned. They're all
switched off now. It's too late.
SoundCloud as well. They're all on there, and we are out typically, every 2 weeks.
We are.
Sometimes we have a show in between, but it's normally the Thursday every 2 weeks. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
A lot of you do.
A lot of you do. And it means if you subscribe, if we're late putting out a show or early putting out, sometimes we've been early actually, and that's just due to us being away, so it's been like the Wednesday night. It means your phone just automatically downloads it when you're connected to Wi-Fi.
Don't even have to think about it.
Don't even have to think about it. It just connects. And leave us a review.
Please do.
Yeah.
And don't forget to enter our competitions every 2 weeks. This week we told you about it at the start. It'll be on social media. It is to win a Reloading with Rosie mug.
Mm-hmm. And if no one gets the competition this week, which hopefully you do because we'll actually put up the post
Make sure
properly,
you can see it.
then I'm getting the Reloading Rosie mug.
And that's a wrap.
Yep.
Hope you enjoyed the show. It's been awesome to have Ben on, and I'm looking forward to having him on again in the future, but hopefully we'll be sharing a beer
in
face
person.
To face, preferably in Montana because I'd really like to go.
Yep. Catch you in 2 weeks.